I mean, look at that. That is a lot of records for one weekend in Denver, Colorado. Not bad. Okay, we're back. We're going to try to get through the rest of the records today. This is where we left off last time. We went through Fleetwood Mac Mirage. One album I was super excited to get, which was U2's Joshua Tree. Phil Collins' Hello, I Must Be Going. Classic Phil Collins. Couple of classic Phil Collins songs on there. Yes, Drama. This is a really interesting turning point in the history of Yes. And then, of course, this soundtrack from the movie Vision Quest, which had the song, Journey song, Only the Young. So anyway, that's where we left off last time. And just so, and we'll put a link down in the first comment if you want to go back and watch the first two videos, the ones where we went through that set of records and then the set of records before that. And to put this in context, just over a week ago, I was in Denver, Colorado, bought a bunch of records, shipped them back here to the studio, and we've spent the last couple of days kind of going through all the records that I purchased. And now we're going to go through we should be able to get through the rest of these in this video. So, okay, here's the first one. Crocus Head Hunter. I've wanted to buy this one now for a while because it's been interesting as we've been working on this channel, how many people have been respond to a lot of this early 80s metal stuff. And I think I have a couple of Crocus albums. I know I have the Blitz. I'm not sure what else I have back there, but I never had Headhunter. At least I never had it on vinyl. And this was just kind of, this was, believe it or not, their 7th album. And back in the early 80s when this thing hit, the song Screamin' in the Night was just kind of took off. And it kind of became, it's probably still to this day is the biggest song that they ever did. But the tune Headhunter was also just amazing. Now, one of the things that made these guys kind of notorious was the fact that their singer, Mark Storace, sounded a lot like Bon Scott. And they were kind of, I remember the first time I heard them, and I had that thought, like, wow, that guy sounds a lot like the old AC/DC singer. Well, anyway, but there's something a little more interesting about this album in particular. So this album came out in 1983. Now, this album was produced by a guy named Tom Allom. Now, Tom Allom was known as a sound engineer back in the early Black Sabbath days, but then he became kind of a well-known producer for a band that everybody knows called Judas Priest. And I think he started producing Judas Priest back in the Unleashed in the East time period, and then he basically just did almost everything, if not everything, after that. And why that's interesting is in 1982, Screaming for Vengeance came out. In 1983, this came out. And there's a lot of stuff on this album, especially the song Headhunter. If you listen to the song Headhunter and you compare it a little bit to the song Screaming for Vengeance, there's a lot of similarities in those two songs. And it's interesting how often a producer really gets his fingerprints on music. And so when you listen to this and when you realize that this is the same guy that produced Screaming for Vengeance, this is the same guy that produced Defenders of the Faith, you can hear it. You can hear, and as a matter of fact, the song Headhunter, complete with the scream at the beginning, the tempo, there's just so many parallels between this song Headhunter and the song Screaming for Vengeance. Go have a listen to them. And you can kind of hear, again, the similarities between what he was doing. So anyway, so the song Headhunter has this, matter of fact, when you listen to Headhunter, you can actually picture Rob Halford singing it. But then the other song that I mentioned a minute ago, which was Screaming in the Night, and that's the one that really, really became popular on this, has a little bit more of a sound that's probably similar to another band that I love called Rough Cut. And when if you know anything about Rough Cut and you listen to Screaming in the Night, you can hear similarities there. And by the way, Tom Allom produced Rough Cut. And if you've never heard that first Rough Cut album, oh my gosh, it is so... I absolutely love that album. Anyway, so this is one I've been wanting to get for a while because I thought it'd be fun to do a video on this, because this was, a little, again, this was a little ways into the career of Krokus, but they kind of hit a high point on this album, and they got fairly well known. They were a band from Switzerland, and so we had a few of those bands coming in the early 80s, like Accept, Scorpions, of course, these guys, and we started having some of these groups from different parts of Europe just kind of showing up and making a mark. And so anyway, this was really cool stuff. I remember listening to this when I was a young guy. And so anyway, I thought it'd be kind of fun. And I saw this at, I don't remember which record store it was, but when I was out in Denver, picked it up, and we'll probably do some, a video or so on Krokus. Anyway, I always thought they were kind of cool. All right, next one. Okay. I don't know why I never had this album, because I loved so many things on this. I loved Sammy Hagar. And I remember when this is before a few years before the whole Van Halen thing, because this came out in 1982, Standing Hampton. And I always dug Sammy Hagar. And when he joined Van Halen, I think for a lot of us, we were pretty excited about it because we already loved Sammy Hagar. We loved Van Halen. We thought, hey, this is going to be just awesome. I'm not one of those guys that I'm more of a David Lee Roth Van Halen guy, although there is a lot of cool stuff that Van Halen put out with Sammy Hagar. But I loved Sammy Hagar. And this album in particular is got to be maybe the high point for Sammy Hagar. And this is actually, I don't remember what album this was, fifth or sixth solo album he put out. I mean, he'd been around doing solo albums for a while. But this one had some really, really like amazing, quintessential Sammy Hagar stuff. So it had the song I'll Fall in Love Again, which is just amazing. He's so great on that song. It also has the song There's Only One Way to Rock, which is also just this incredible Sammy Hagar tune. And probably the one, these memories when you go back, what was the first time I ever really became familiar with Sammy Hagar? And it was either that song, There's Only One Way to Rock, or it was the other one that was on this album, the song Heavy Metal. And it's a one-way ticket to midnight. Oh my gosh, it was such a cool tune. The fact that it starts out in kind of that cut time, a little bit slower, and then it goes into double time in the choruses. I mean, it was such a great tune. I absolutely loved Sammy Hagar. And I never bought this album, but this came out in 1982. And I think this album kind of ushered in the time when Sammy Hagar was just kind of as big as he was going to get, just bigger than life. Because he put this album out. The next album was Three Lock Box, which was huge. And then he had VOA. And then around this time, he's putting out the Hagar, Sean, Aronson, Shreve album. And then, of course, he joins Van Halen. 5150 comes out. And Sammy Hagar is just everywhere. He was just so big. But this album, kind of for me, from a Sammy Hagar solo standpoint, was when he hit his peak. The songs that I mentioned were just so spectacular, and he was just top form. I mean, his voice was so great. There was just something about him that was just amazing. And so anyway, I just never owned this album, and I saw it there at Wax Trax and thought I'd pick it up. And we need to do some more videos on Sammy Hagar, because I just always really dug the guy. He was actually he was a great songwriter. He was a really good guitar player. Of course, his voice was just as good as it gets. And so I always dug Sammy Hagar. So anyway, it's kind of cool to pick this one up. So, all right. Moving on to the next one. Oh, yeah. Okay. This one, I don't know why I never actually, I might have had a CD of this, but I know for sure I never had the vinyl. Now, this is Aerosmith Rocks. Now, for a lot of people, this is when Aerosmith really hit their high point. And I don't know, it's hard to argue with that, because this album, it's called Rocks, and it really, it rocks. I mean, it has so much great stuff on this one. And I remember the first time, I think the first song I ever heard by Aerosmith was probably Walk This Way, which was on the album before this one. But what really sold me on Steven Tyler as a vocalist maybe and lyricist was a song Back in the Saddle, which is what this album starts out with. And it has a da-na, da-na, and it has that build up. And then when he screams, I'm back, and that back, I don't know that anybody's ever had a more awesome vocal line ever than when he screams, I'm back. It's so incredible. And so I just fell in love with that. That is up there, in my opinion, with just the best things that Aerosmith ever put out. Now, interestingly, you know, they're hitting their high point here. This is their fourth album. They'd put out this album just called Aerosmith. Then they had a song called Get Your Wings. And then they put out Toys in the Attic. And Toys in the Attic, I think to this, I don't know for sure, but I think it might still be their top-selling album. I don't know. Some of this stuff that they did, Pump might have rivaled it. I didn't look it up, but you go back there, Toys in the Attic was in that multi like 7-8 million copies sold. It was incredible. And of course, that's the one that has Walk This Way. That's the one that has Sweet Emotion. The song Toys in the Attic obviously is on that one. And it was so spectacular. And then, you know, that put them on the map like nothing else, you know. And then they followed up with this album, Rocks, which is their fourth album. And then, of course, they have some, you know, this thing just becomes huge. I don't think this didn't sell as well as Toys in the Attic, but this one just solidified them as just rock gods. And the song that's on here that's kind of a sleeper for me, the one that I probably might be my favorite tune on here, is the song Sick as a Dog. I don't know why I love that tune so much. The first time I ever heard it was on an album they put out called, I think it's called Double Live Bootleg. I can't remember for sure. It's basically a live album. And I heard the song, excuse me, Sick as a Dog on there and just thought, and it was so great. And then you listen to the studio version and it's just so amazing. Anyway, this whole album is great, but this was a high point for them. And after this album, the cracks started appearing. Cracks. And and maybe that's not the wrong way to say it because the drug abuse started entering into it too. So they put out another album right after this one that was called Draw the Line. And it had a couple of cool tunes on there, but that was when they got so big, and then drug abuse and just problems set in. The cracks started coming into the band. And then they put out one other one after that called Night in the Ruts. And somewhere in the middle of that, recording that album, Joe Perry leaves the band. And then Jimmy Crespo actually plays some of the guitar lines in that album. And then by the time they get to the next album, it's called Rock in a Hard Place. And at that point, Brad Whitford and Joe Perry are gone. So it's amazing when you look at this, because here they were. They put out Rocks. They're just as big. They're huge. Just this massive band. They're so successful, and then they just destroy it. I mean, it's just kind of that common story that happens. You just get so big, so successful, all the problems start setting in, the substance abuse, and then a couple of albums that just kind of don't do, you know, they do okay, but they're not quite as good. Band falls apart. They put out an album called Rock in a Hard Place, again, where Jimmy Crespo comes in and he plays most of the guitar lines. I think Brad Whitford might have played a little bit on that album, but it was mostly Jimmy Crespo. And then Dufresne, I can't remember the guy's name. There's another guitarist that played on it. But then somehow they, a little while after Rock in a Hard Place comes out, they managed to get the original band back together, and they put out an album called Done with Mirrors. And I have a video on this channel that I did about I've got one about Done with Mirrors. And for me, that is as good as anything they ever put out, although it's probably one of their least known albums. And it was produced by Ted Templeman, the guy that was Van Halen's producer. And then of course, after that, Permanent Vacation, and then they were back. And then they had, that huge career after that, with Pump and Get a Grip, and just kept getting, and they just became legends again, which is, and it's fascinating looking at this album in that trajectory, because you rarely see a band that does that, where you start off, they have these albums, they get to the third and fourth albums, the Toys in the Attic and then Rocks, where they're just so big, they're so successful, everything's going so well, and then all the problems set in, and then the band just kind of falls apart, and then usually that's kind of it. But then, somehow like a phoenix, they come back, and then they put out... Done with Mirrors, and they put out Permanent Vacation, which was just loaded with hits. And then they were back. And then, just hit after hit after that. It was amazing watching these guys kind of resurrect themselves the way that they did, and then have this other career, which was arguably as big as the one they'd had in the 70s. There at the end of the 80s and early 90s. And it was just amazing watching what these guys did. And maybe it's a testament to the fact that they were just good. Steven Tyler, I get back to that thing when I talked about, when you talk about the song Back in the Saddle, he was just that good. He had that incredible voice. He has this amazing stage presence. He has these lyrics that are just spectacular. And lest we forget, one of the other things that kind of put them back on the map was the song Walk This Way being done with Run DMC back, that was one of the things that brought them back into the world. But just having something like that isn't everything you need. You have to have something behind it to put out another album after that and have that thing take off. And they did. I mean, Permanent Vacation, I know I'm almost positive I've done another video on this channel about that one. That was... top shelf, in my opinion, top shelf Aerosmith, and same thing with the album right before that, which was Done with Mirrors. And if you like Aerosmith and you've never listened to Done with Mirrors, you need to go listen to it. It's so great. As a matter of fact, it starts off with a song called Let the Music Do the Talkin', which was actually from the Joe Perry project. When Joe Perry left the band, which we talked about a minute ago, he went and started a band called the Joe Perry Project. And one of the songs that he had was Let the Music Do the Talkin', which then he brought to Aerosmith when Aerosmith got back together. And in my opinion, the Aerosmith version of that song is far superior to the one that Joe Perry had done with his solo project. Anyway, I'm rambling on as usual, a little bit too much, but this album, like I said, I never had the vinyl of this thing. And this was such an important album in the history of Aerosmith. And we have to do more Aerosmith videos just because they were so important. They were so good. And I thought for sure we have to do some videos, or at least one, if not more videos on this album and everything that was happening around this thing, because Rocks was just that important. Okay. Moving on. Yeah, and that album actually, because the next one I'm going to show you actually came out in the 70s. That album, it's interesting to think about these things in context, because this came out in 1976. And you start putting some of these things in context because, disco is there. You have Boston is becoming huge at this point. You have Meatloaf, you have Kiss. I mean, it's always interesting to kind of think of all those other things. And that's partly why I wanted to do more of these videos about this, because when you start thinking about that context of what was going on in the world at the time, makes it even more interesting. And I just thought of that because the next album that I'm about to pull out came out in 1978. And it's actually... I did in 2 videos ago on these albums I bought in Denver, I had another Cars album, and again, while I was at this one's at Angelo's CDs and More, I think is what it's called. I also never owned this album. I have some Cars stuff. I know for sure. I have some of their singles. I have the best of Cars, but I just also never had this one. And this one came out in 1978, and this one probably, when you look at the history of the Cars, it's hard to beat this album because it was their first album, and it just had so many great tunes on it. It had Let the Good Times Roll, which is the first song on this album, and I mean, talk about what a song to just kind of kick off your career. And it just was, I mean, let the good times roll. And the song is so killer. And then it has My Best Friend's Girlfriend. It has Just What I Needed. It had You're All I've Got Tonight. And anyway, it was such a great album. And I'd been thinking about the Cars a lot lately because, of course, Roy Thomas Baker passed away, and he had produced a bunch of these albums in the early Cars days. And this one, of course, he produced this album. And so I've been thinking about him a little bit, and then I thought, man, we need to do videos on the Cars. And I found this one, and I found that other one that I did last time, or a couple of videos ago. And I thought, yeah, the Cars is something that we really need to spend some time talking about these guys. Okay, next record. Okay, we're down to the last album, if you can believe it, in the haul that I bought in Denver when I was out there. It took us 3 videos because I just can't stop talking to get through all these. But this one, I might be most excited about this album of everything that I bought. And those of you that follow the channel on a regular basis will know immediately why this was such a big deal for me. So check this out. This is Led Zeppelin III, but not a normal copy of Led Zeppelin III. So this is a pirated version of Led Zeppelin III, and if you flip it over here, you'll see that it has some kind of traditional Chinese writing on it. Now, the reason, if you followed this channel very often, you would know that this was a big deal, because I actually have, and I've made videos about it before, I have another pirated copy of this album that I bought back in high school. And I made it, the last time I made a video about it, this would have been a few months ago, I took it out and it was just flaking, falling to pieces. Because these were pirated things made a long, long time ago. And what you'll notice about this that's different than the original Led Zeppelin III is this is just very flimsy paper. The other one that I have made a video about is even more flimsy than this one. But if you remember, the Led Zeppelin III that was released, by the real record company, had that each of these things, these circles were holes in the cover, and then it had that spinny wheel, which you kind of represented right there, and you would turn it, and then the big wheel in there would change, and then all the different pictures inside the holes would change. This, of course, doesn't have that. It just is made out of this kind of this paper. And so it was really cool for me to I was in this Recollect Records, or Recollect, I can't remember, I didn't ask him how they say it there, but in this particular, this store, Recollect Records, it was probably, of all the record stores that I visited in Denver, this one was probably my favorite one. It was bright and clean and organized, and it had, for me, the coolest selection of stuff. I think I mentioned I could have bought 30, 40 things. There were so many things that I was interested in there. But anyway, I found this, and it was so cool to actually see this now, to have another kind of pirated copy of this album. And these are so cool because they're a little bit of a timestamp. Because Led Zeppelin III came out in 1970. Man, can you imagine that? 1970, 55 years ago, Led Zeppelin III came out. And then, over in Asia then, this would have been, I think this was printed in South Korea, and then they would distribute these things. This is how you'd get some of these albums into these communist countries. And so it's this interesting timestamp looking back at how this stuff was done way back when. And now it was exciting for me to get one that's in a little better condition than the one I have. I'm actually, my other Led Zeppelin III, the pirated version I have, the bootleg copy that I have, is just crumbling so bad right now that I don't even want to touch it. So it's kind of cool to get another one and to have these kind of cool versions. And of course, Led Zeppelin III itself is, such an important album from Led Zeppelin, the Led Zeppelin story, because they had kind of changed courses a little bit. It has some of the greatest Led Zeppelin tunes too, like Immigrant Song, for example, which is just, so incredible. And I actually, the other one that I have, the pirated copy that I have, I actually played it once a long time ago, and it sounds terrible. You can barely hear the music over the noise. And I haven't played this one, but I'd imagine that this is no different. Because when you take these things open, we'll actually do a video where we kind of take this apart and look at it. But when you look at the labels, they're not the same. They have misprints on them. I mean, it's again, this is all just pirated versions of this stuff done over in Asia. And so it's really, really cool for me personally to get my hands on some of this stuff and as a kind of a collector of these things. And if you're a Led Zeppelin fan, I thought you'd enjoy seeing this, because it's such an interesting thing watching how this stuff was done, seeing these pirated versions of these albums, kind of seeing what people were doing at the time and distributing these things, and how music just has a way of finding its way into people's hands, and this is just an example of that, where you can't really stop it. It's gonna get into people's hands somehow, and this is actually a really interesting example of that right here. Anyway, I thought you'd get a kick out of that, and that is the end of all the records that I bought out in Denver. It only took me three videos and what almost probably an hour and a half, almost 2 hours just to talk about these different records, because I just can't stop myself when I start talking. So hopefully it's semi-interesting when we go through these things, and it's kind of fun just to do this, because some of the memories and reminiscing about this music and what an impact it had on so many of us back in the day when these things were coming out. So if you ever own anything like this, put it down in the notes. Tell me a little bit about this. And what were your thoughts about Led Zeppelin III in particular, just from a basic Led Zeppelin standpoint? Where did this one stack up in your favorite stuff? And then looking back at the other stuff that we just looked at today, we had the Cars, their debut album, which was just awesome. We have Aerosmith Rocks, which was they were at a high point here. Just no doubt about it. They were amazing back then. Sammy Hagar, Standing Hampton, one of the greatest things Sammy Hagar ever put out as a solo artist. Of course, Head Hunter, that's the one we started this video with. And just for fun, because they're still just sitting here, here's all the rest of the records. If you didn't watch the other videos, I'll put a link to the other videos down below. But we talked about Vision Quest. We talked about this amazing album that Yes had put out. And this was kind of an unusual one for Yes. Phil Collins' Hello, I Must Be Going. We had Joshua Tree by U2. We talked about every one of these things. Isn't that crazy? We have Fleetwood Mac's Mirage, which wasn't my favorite Fleetwood Mac album, but it still had some important music on it. Of course, Tommy Bolin's Teaser. We talked about Black Sabbath's Paranoid. And this was cool for me to actually get one that was printed back in the day, way back when. We had Uriah Heep, Demons and Wizards. Look at all these. Man, I bought so many records when I was out there. And I want to make videos about all these things, because all these things were these were important. And then, of course, we have Shake It Up, which is one that we talked a little bit about, the fact, anyway, this is just that early Cars stuff that was so great. Actually, this was their fourth album, so it was not as early as the one that we just showed you a second ago, but anyway, still great stuff. Of course, you had Pieces of Eight, Picture Disc, we had Rainbow, Bent Out of Shape, and then kind of to top it off, the first one we started with when we looked at this haul was this album, Beckett, which was where Rainbow's Gold came from, if you're familiar with Iron Maiden. Anyway, we talked about that before. Hey, thanks for taking the time to join me to talk about these things. This is so much fun talking about them, and boy, we really, really appreciate all the feedback. I mean, we get emails sent to us all the time, which is great, hearing all the different things you have to say and the suggestions, which we really appreciate. And we really, really appreciate it when you put it down in the comments, because, of course, then YouTube can see that people are actually interacting with the video, and we read all the stuff. And it's so fascinating communicating with everybody about these old memories, these old albums. And so often you guys bring up things that me and Gary, or we just kind of forgotten about, or we blew past it when we were talking about the album. And anyway, it's really, really enjoyable on our end putting these videos together, talking about these things, reminiscing, and then kind of sharing these experiences with you all, reliving and rethinking about this stuff that really had such an impact on so many of us. So anyway, I appreciate you taking the time to be with me here today. Of course, follow the channel if you're not following the channel already. like the video, and like I said a minute ago, please share your comments. And if you like this stuff, probably a really good chance that you know other people that like this stuff as well. So we highly encourage you to send out an email, post this on your Facebook, throw this in other places where other people, like-minded people, will find it and find this stuff interesting as well. And so with that, have yourself a fantastic day.